collaboration between all the entities over on East Troublesome has been impressive. We have Grant County and Northern Water. They're working really, really well together. They're making things happen. We're trying to get a lot of work done over there, and we need that.
Debris booms, debris removal, sediment management, 5,000 acres of mulching. That's really pretty extraordinary to have been able to mobilize in this fashion in a short amount of time.
There's no way that Grant County could have done that without the help of all of the partners.
None of this would be possible without NRCS,
Colorado River District,
3 Lakes Watershed,
Middle Park Conservation District, the U.S. Geological Survey.
We worked with our partners at the Bureau of Reclamation, and we were able to make all of our deliveries to our water users this year.
The Grand Foundation,
Colorado Water Conservation Board,
Colorado Department of Agriculture,
our Colorado delegation that was very actively engaged in advocating at the right levels.
These projects are happening on private property, reaching out to 400 landowners, maybe even 500 at this point.
Oh, it's been great. Absolutely. It's gone really well. All the government agencies, I think what they're doing is a great thing.
To see how these relationships grew and solidified over time. That's really an incredible silver lining to the tragedy and the devastation that occurred.
We thought, it's moving slow. Then all of a sudden it started gaining speed. The day that the fire hit us, it was moving. About 5:30, 6 o'clock, and we got a pre-evac, and within 10 minutes we got the code red, get out. It's coming. Then I'm scrambling. I'm trying to unhook a trailer, trying to hook onto a horse trailer. I had 2 more horses I had to get out. By that time, it was dark, it was smoky, it was windy. Embers and fireballs were flying by us. Maybe an hour after I left the ranch, that the ranch was gone. It hit it that fast. The last picture I took of the ranch with all the buildings standing, you could see the glow of the pink in the back. It is a weird feeling, walking out of your house and coming back to a house that's not even there.
Well, I've never experienced a natural disaster, and it's really opened my eyes.
I think we were all pretty stunned, one with the scale of it, but also just how quickly it came upon us. The East Troublesome fire burned 193,000 acres in West Slope watersheds. The majority of these watersheds sit right upstream of the Colorado Big Thompson project. And our system serves over 1 million people on the Front Range, as well as 600,000 acres of irrigation. It was really upstream of our system, and it was going to affect us directly. It was very overwhelming. It felt very personal. We had been working in these watersheds, in these systems for many, many years. Some of us live over there, and we certainly know the people that live over there and have been working with them for many years.
In February, we worked with NRCS and our EWP partners to do site visits in the burn area and affected areas of the East Troublesome fire and prepare damage survey reports. These really gave a high level understanding of what the post-fire impacts might be. We also identified post-fire treatments.
We initially estimated the needs to be about $35 million.
purpose of the EWP program and the objectives are is after you have a watershed impairment, that program can be utilized to reduce erosion, sedimentation, and the threat of future flooding to protect life and property. And that program is utilized through sponsors. In the case of the East Troublesome, not only Grand County, but also Northern Water.
Thanks to our lobbyists and partnerships, we joined forces and asked the state to step up and help us with securing that funding and got a lot of support.
Here we are on the debris boom project. We are here at Adams Tunnel.
The debris booms that we're putting in as part of the East Troublesome Fire effort are made to protect some of our infrastructure from floating debris. So we have floating tree limbs, burned debris that's coming in from the fire. And these debris booms basically sit on top of the water, and then they have a 2-foot screen below that. Adams Tunnel is where all of the Colorado Big Thompson water is run through underneath Rocky Mountain National Park into the east slope. So it is the one tunnel where all of that water is brought from the west slope to the east slope. We want to make sure that portal is protected.
The Adams Tunnel is the artery to the CBT's project, so we're doing this to protect the structure in the event that we'd have a big rain event and water would come down and debris. We are now heading over to Willow Creek, and we're actually going to put 2 debris booms in there.
This reservoir in this watershed had a really high burn rate. Over 90% of the watershed was burned. And so we know there's going to be a lot of fire debris.
One of the treatments that we have been working with NRCS on is seeding and mulching of priority watersheds and priority areas. The fires caused a lot of the vegetation on the ground to be burned and a lot of soil to be exposed. So this practice helps reestablish vegetation and prevent that hill slope erosion that we might see. This summer, we completed about 2,300 acres of aerial seeding and mulching on private lands. We're planning to do aerial mulching of about 2,200 acres on Forest Service land this fall, but we're also working to identify additional treatments next spring.
In the beginning, we started by reaching out to, I'm going to say over 400 landowners, maybe even 500. Some of the projects we've been working on are debris removal from steep slopes and areas that the debris would fall into waterways. We're also doing some hill slope gully erosion projects. And the biggest project we've done this summer is the aerial seeding and mulching with helicopters. And on Travis's property, we needed mulch for the U.S. Forest Service that abuts his property. And so what we were able to do then is our subcontractors could go in and they were able to chip some of the debris he had on his property and then bring that up to the steep slopes of the U.S. Forest Service.
They came in and chipped them all, chipped that whole pile, flew them onto the forest and got rid of all the mulch. I'm pleased at what was happened with the chipping program and the cleanup program.
We did all kinds of outreach. So there were personal one-on-one landowner meetings, there were virtual town halls, an in-person town hall. People walking by could stop in and see what we were doing with our projects. We're continuing to do those town halls and reach out to the public as much as we can.
Northern and Grand County partnered up to offer materials to help them protect their homes, whether it was sandbags, straw wattles, various other types of treatments that the landowners could use. Just a self-help, come and get your stuff. I think it was an innovative idea.
We've been collecting water quality data in the area of the East Troublesome Fire for almost 20 years. We made some modifications to our water quality program by increasing sampling activities at the locations that we felt were the most impacted by the fire. In addition to that, we added several more water quality sondes that collect data every 15 minutes. We also share these data with our partners and have developed tools that allow quick visualization of current water quality conditions. We hold monthly meetings with water treatment plants on the East Slope that rely on CBT water as a source drinking water supply.
For the amount of snowpack that we got this year,
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's training webinar with the NRCS Watershed Program. My name is Lark Gilmer, and I'm the Communications Specialist for the Watershed Program branch. So a brief overview of what we'll be discussing today. We'll be focusing on the funding requirements and how best to access the opportunities provided for by the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act. And to start us off, Kevin Farmer, our branch chief, will be giving an overview, followed by the three program managers, Ralph Smith, Jesse Wilson, and then John Derbish. And then Kevin will swing back in and provide the timelines for project phase completion and when to submit your applications. And then we'll wrap it up with a Q&A at the very end. And on that note, please feel free to ask any question in the Q&A box at any time, and we'll answer them as best we can at the end. So to get us started, Kevin, are you ready? And Kevin Farmer, our branch chief of the Watershed Programs.
Good morning. Thank you, Lark. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for calling in to our second Watershed Programs training for the general public. This is an exciting time as we are now about to embark on an endeavor to be able to provide to the community as a result of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, watershed funding through the Watershed Program, the Watershed Rehabilitation Program, and the Emergency Watershed Protection Program. This marks a very historic time in our agency's programs to see this level of funding provided to address some of the backlog and new opportunities that are out there. We do want to work closely with you as sponsors and partners to make sure that we are providing quality assistance to make sure that you know how to access these funds, as well as you have the ability to actually do the implementation necessary to carry out the work to help people help the land and to benefit those folks in your communities who are in need of watershed assistance. Specifically speaking of the funding that was provided, the infrastructure funding provided $500 million for the Watershed Operations Program. It provided $118 million for the Watershed Rehabilitation Program, and it provided an additional $300 million for the Emergency Watershed Protection Program. In addition to that, our agency does hope to be able to receive additional funding through the annual appropriations that would also allow us to further help communities out there who are in need of addressing issues within your watershed. Prior to today's meeting, we had 3 other training and outreach type of meetings. 2 of them were internal, where we provided information to our agency leaders as well as the program managers in each of the states so that they would be equipped to be able to serve you and to help you access these funds and get requests to us so that we can make decisions on what projects across the nation will be funded. We do anticipate that there will be a lot of interest and a lot of requests, and we may not be able to fund every request, but our states are poised to be able to at least receive your requests, process them, and get them to headquarters so that they can be reviewed, ranked, and a decision made on funding opportunities. As well as that, we've had, so there were 2 trainings on that, and then we had 1 additional training yesterday for the public at 2 o'clock, which is similar to what we're going to do today. So the focus today is to provide training to you as sponsors, partners, community representatives, so that you can understand what the 3 programs are, know exclusively how to request funding from each of the programs, and then understand what your role would be as a sponsor in these programs. It's important that we all understand the key word sponsor, because everything we do today requires a local sponsor. So we're going to talk about that today, to identify who those individuals are who would qualify as local sponsors. We're going to talk about what each of these 3 programs can do and what some of the limitations may be. And then also we're going to talk about some of the flexibilities that each of the programs offer. So hold on, this is going to be a pretty long training, but I think that there's going to be a lot of information out there that you want to hear and that you'll want to definitely digest and keep for your records, and also ask additional questions as need be. We are going to take questions at the end, so I hope that you're jotting down those questions and putting them into the question and answer section of this live event so that we can address them. There are no questions that we don't want to hear. Any question that you have out there is a good question. So send us all the questions so that we can address your questions and make sure that everyone understands clearly how to access these programs, how to implement the work, and then how to better serve your community. So with that, I'm going to ask our National Program Manager for the Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Operations Program, Ralph Smith, if he will now take the lead in guiding you through the first program, our Watershed Operations Program, and then he'll be followed by Jesse Wilson and then John Derbish. Thank you much, and I will see you at the end of this presentation with more additional information on some things that you want to hear also. Thanks, Lark.
Thanks, Kevin. And just to let everyone know, I think I forgot to mention that we will be taking a break. The session's probably going to last 2 hours, and about halfway through, we'll take a 10-minute break. So, Ralph, are you ready to go?
I think so, Lark. Just let me get my screen going here.
Wonderful.
All right, welcome everyone. My name is Ralph Smith, and I will be talking with you about the Watershed and Flood Prevention Operations Program and the opportunities that exist with that program. During my presentation today, I'll provide an overview of the Watershed Program. Then I'll also discuss how you as potential sponsors can work with your local NRCS office to initiate a PO 566 watershed project effort.
Hey, Ralph, can I just interrupt you briefly? I don't
Sure.
see your screen.
Okay. Let's try to present again here.
There's always a little bit of technical difficulty here, folks. Thanks so much for your patience.
Can you see it now?
I can't. Let me see. Nope, I don't see it. Here, I'll just scroll through for you.
See here. Let me. I think I know what's going on here.
Okay, sounds good.
Then I think okay, and then send live. All right. Then we'll do this. Can we see it now?
I can.
Great. All right. So yeah, so I'll just jump right back on it here. So okay. So give me a little bit of background on the PO 566 program in case you're new. This is your first time hearing about the program. The Flood Control Act of 1944 and the Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Act, Public Law 566, PO 566, are the foundational legislation for the Watershed Operations Program. The purpose of the program was to authorize the Natural Resource Conservation Service to provide assistance in the planning and installation of flood control measures to reduce losses caused by flooding. The Watershed Protection and Flood Prevention Act, as amended, authorizes the Secretary of Agriculture to cooperate with states and local agencies in planning and carrying out works of improvement for soil conservation and for other purposes. It provides for technical, financial, and credit assistance by the USDA to sponsoring local organizations, SLOs, representing the people living in watersheds. It also provides for needed additional treatment and protection of federally owned lands within such watersheds. The Watershed Program requires the development of physically, environmentally, socially, and economically sound watershed project plans with actions scheduled for implementation over a specified period of years. Watershed project plans contain project actions which are formally planned undertakings carried out within a specified geographic area by sponsors for the benefit of the general public. Public Law 566 sets forth three general purposes: preventing damage from erosion, floodwater, and sediment, furthering the conservation, development, utilization, and disposal of water, and furthering the conservation and proper utilization of land. The previously mentioned general purposes are more specifically refined as shown here. Every NRCS watershed project will have one or more of these purposes. In the next few slides, we will review each purpose in detail. As we do so, think about watershed scale projects in your area that could be addressed under the authority of one or more of these purposes. The flood prevention or flood damage reduction purpose. Historically, this is one of the most widely utilized purposes in the program. The flood prevention purpose involves installing measures to prevent or reduce damages caused by floodwater. Flood damage reduction is further defined as the control and disposal of surface water caused by abnormally high direct precipitation, stream overflow, or floods aggravated or caused by wind or tidal effects. Flood damage reduction and mitigation measures reduce or prevent floodwater damages by reducing runoff, erosion, and sediment, modifying the susceptibility of improvements in the floodplain to damage, removing damageable property from the floodplain, or reducing the frequency, depth, or velocity of flooding. Measures may also include actions that prevent encroachment into the floodplain. Two examples of this purpose in action are where one state is currently working under this purpose to buy out homes in an area that has experienced repeated damage due to flooding for a number of years. Another state is building levees around a rural community to protect homes and businesses from frequent flooding. The watershed protection purpose consists of land treatment practices within a watershed that result in reduced off-site flooding, erosion, sediment, and agricultural pollutants. Project measures result in conserved or developed soil, improved water quality or quantity, enhancements to woodland, fish, and wildlife habitat, recreation, and scenic resources. Watershed protection can also involve the conservation of energy. The NRCS office in Tennessee worked with the town of Oneida to implement a project with this purpose in the Bear Creek watershed. Remnants of mining in the area during the 1800s resulted in acid mine drainage going directly into the creek, all but terminating any life in those waterways. After reclamation efforts and treatment of runoff through the watershed project, aquatic life was detected in reaches of Bear Creek that had been void of life for many years. The project also had a tremendous unexpected benefit of economic development to the area, increased home sites, and the construction of a recreational sports complex. Under the public recreation purpose, measures may include picnic areas, sanitary facilities, fishing piers, shelters, cooking grills, parking areas, swimming beaches, access roads, water and trails. The public fish and wildlife purpose, involves the improvement of the habitat or the environment for the breeding, growth, and development of fish and other wildlife. The agricultural water management purpose includes drainage, groundwater recharge, irrigation, water conservation, water quality improvement, and agricultural, including rural communities, water supply. Work in this purpose must serve groups of landowners and communities. A state in the West is currently working within their watershed to install basins to help with the recharge of aquifers. This effort would have direct benefit to producers who rely on irrigation to keep their crops efficiently watered. The purpose of the municipal and industrial water supply covers those measures necessary to provide storage capacity in reservoirs to increase the availability of water for present and future municipal and industrial needs. Under this purpose, NRCS can work with sponsors to cover the cost for outlet works and pipelines to convey water from water bodies to existing or proposed treatment facilities or water systems. Water quality management through water quality management, measures provide water storage capacity in reservoirs for regulation of stream flow to improve water quality in streams, downstream of the reservoirs. Dams that were built by NRCS can be rehabilitated to modern standards through this purpose. NRCS does not rehabilitate dams not constructed by NRCS. Details of the NRCS Dam Rehabilitation Program will be discussed in the next presentation. So when you or your organization approaches NRCS with a product idea, you most likely have an idea of how you think the resource concern needs to be addressed. Maybe your organization has done studies or hired consultants to help you develop solutions to your issue. This information can be very valuable. However, because each NRCS authorized project is considered a federal action, we must follow an approach that requires us to consider all possible alternatives that might address the resource concern. We encourage sponsors to keep an open mind and realize that during the planning process, other possible ways to address the resource concern may be revealed. As you work with NRCS, you might present an idea such as, our community would like to install 8 basins to aid in the recharge of our aquifers. We know exactly where we would like to build them, and this project will greatly help the farmers in the watershed who irrigate their fields with center pivot systems. NRCS planners are likely to describe your project as, this project in the Happy River watershed will have the purpose of agricultural water management. The project will address the need to recharge the aquifer, which will benefit producers who utilize irrigation in the watershed. Notice, in the NRCS approach, we do not specifically discuss what measures are planned to be installed. We simply state the purpose, agricultural water management, and the need to recharge the aquifer. We'll now review the main statutory requirements of the program. First, the project must have a sponsor that meets the eligibility requirements, which includes having the power of eminent domain and authority to levy taxes. Also, requests for more than $25 million in financial assistance must be congressionally approved. This is not to say that you can't submit a request for more than $25 million, but the time that it will take for that request to be processed, that project to come to fruition and the plan to be approved will be considerably longer. So we try to aim or guide people to definitely doing what is make sure the project covers the full scope of the effort. However, it should be, we just want people to be mindful of the $25 million level at which we must get congressional approval. Also, agricultural benefits, including those to rural communities, must comprise at least 20% of the project benefits. This is not about acres, but about the financial benefits that can be attributed to a specific purpose. Additional information on benefits is available in the NRCS Watershed Manual and the NRCS Water Resources Handbook for Economics. Projects must be less than 250,000 acres, and the projects should not include any single structure that provides more than 12,500 acre-feet of floodwater detention capacity. Another statutory requirement is that the projects must not provide more than 25,000 acre-feet of total capacity. Okay. So this table shows, we're going to switch gears a little bit and start talking about some of the financial assistance that's available through the program. And this table shows the financial assistance available through all of the purposes that I've mentioned thus far. And let's look at one of the listed purposes and explain how the project would flow when NRCS funds are available. So if we continue with the example I used earlier, whose purpose was agricultural water management, for a project that aims to focus on groundwater recharge, if the project is selected for funding by the NRCS chief, NRCS staff can begin the process of developing a watershed plan, environmental assessment, or an environmental impact statement. The cost for this planning, technical assistance, is entirely covered by NRCS. In addition, after the plan is authorized, the effort to design specific measures will also be covered by NRCS. Only at the time of construction will the project sponsor need to provide their matching 25%. If any land rights are required for the project, the sponsor will need to acquire those at their own expense. So let's talk a little bit about funding. For 2021, Congress appropriated $175 million in discretionary funds and $50 million in mandatory funds. While we are currently under continuing resolution, we anticipate that these same amounts will be appropriated for fiscal year 22. So far for fiscal year 2022, Congress has appropriated $500 million in discretionary funds through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. As we work to move these funds into projects, the current administration has set as priorities working on efforts that will in some way address needs associated with Western drought and water supply, that will impact historically underserved and tribal communities, or bring new partners and sponsors to the Watershed Program. So if you're here today, you can probably think of a resource concern in your state or community that could possibly be addressed through one of the Watershed Program project purposes. Maybe there's an issue with flooding in a small town or a rural area with impaired water due to abandoned mines or agricultural runoff. So how do you get started? In each state, the NRCS State Conservation is the person who is ultimately responsible for making sure that all of the USDA program managers who work on the day-to-day operation. In each state, the NRCS State Conservation is the person who is ultimately responsible for making sure that all of the USDA NRCS programs are carried out properly. The state conservationist has program managers who work on the day-to-day operation and implementation of the programs. At the county level, NRCS district conservationists are the face of all USDA NRCS programs and are usually the first points of contact for projects. District conservationists play a crucial role rallying the community and engaging local stakeholders and partners. They also help coordinate many aspects of a project's planning, design, and eventual implementation. So in many situations, the DC might be the first person who is contacted about a potential project. The DC will elevate requests for potential projects to the state watershed program manager. The state program manager then works with the project sponsor to determine if the project meets the program requirements. This is done through the development of a preliminary investigation feasibility report, also called a PIFR. Through the PIFR, new projects are evaluated to determine that there are no insurmountable obstacles or barriers to the project's completion and that the project is compatible with the PO 566 program. PIFRs can be started at any time. If the PIFR results in a state conservationist approved project, the state conservationist and program manager will submit a funding request to the NRCS NHQ for planning considering the performance priorities of the state and the staff and financial resources that are available to accomplish the request. Let's look at a project idea from its start and show how it flows through NRCS. The project idea starts at the local or state level. Landowners, community activists, and stakeholders come together in support of addressing a resource concern in their community. Initially, they may talk to the district conservationist about the idea, and the district conservationist tells them about the USDA NRCS Watershed Program. Because the project involves several landowners, some of whom are not farmers or producers, the Watershed Program seems like it will be a good fit to address the issue. The district conservationist arranges a meeting with the state program manager and project sponsor. When the state program manager and project sponsor meet, they go over the watershed issue and what things might be done to resolve it. The state program manager reviews the program requirements with the sponsor. The state program manager will initiate the development of a preliminary investigation feasibility report using NRCS staff or a contractor. The PIFR is an internal document used by the state conservationist to make a decision about the potential project. If it's determined that the project is compatible with the Watershed Operations Program, that there are no insurmountable obstacles, and the state conservationist gives the project a green light, the state PM and project sponsor can submit a request for funds to prepare a watershed plan, environmental assessment, or environmental impact statement to the NRCS NHQ. The sponsor will have to request planning assistance in writing. The sponsor is also responsible for coordinating projects with the governor of the state or the designated agency responsible for coordinating water resource projects in that state. NRCS HQ will review and prioritize funding requests to initiate planning efforts. New planning requests are evaluated against how many other plans are being developed by a state and are also balanced against requests for construction and design. NRCS no longer requires the preparation of funding proposals, and also there will also not be a specific deadline for funding requests to be submitted. Rather, funding requests can be submitted by the state conservationists at any time. NRCS senior leadership will evaluate all funding requests holistically, provide funding based on administrative priorities as previously described. Now, I said that there isn't going to be a deadline. There's a kind of caveat to that, which Kevin will go over a little bit later. So just keep in mind that that in general, we're moving the program away from as a specific deadline once a year where we provide funds out to the states. Only because of the infrastructure bill, there's a little bit of a caveat, but Kevin will go there in more detail later. But in general, the program will be a continuous sign up, if you will, type or a funding type of a program going forward. And that will hopefully enable us to keep things moving from planning to design, from design to construction more smoothly. So, so if you're not sure how to contact the NRCS, so that pretty much wraps up the bulk of what we would want to talk about as far as how to access the funds and whatnot. But the main key thing for you all to understand is that you can't request the funds directly from headquarters. You have to work through the state conservationist, the state conservationist staff, usually a program manager, to request first a PIFR and then eventually planning funds and then design funds and construction funds after that. So if you are trying to figure out who it is you need to contact, you can go to our website. Here's the web address for that, and it lists all of our points of contact, program managers across the country, and that is your first stop as far as accessing the program. And those folks, as Kevin mentioned, we provided training to them last week, and that they will be able to help you direct you to the proper, give you the proper information to get you going within the program. So I'm going to show you one quick little video here of a successful project that we've got going on in Massachusetts. Let me change my screen here real quick here. Just take a few minutes. Wait a second, let me stop something. I may not be trying to share my audio. Let me do one thing. Okay. Can someone confirm were you able to hear my audio in that?
No, we weren't able to hear the audio.
Okay. Let me do this a different way then. Okay.
Stay tuned, folks. It's going to go live in a minute. There we go.
We are standing right now near Mill Creek, which is a tributary to Sandwich Harbor, which is connected to Cape Cod Bay. This area has always been a valuable resource to the town as far as the water, the beaches, the shellfish resources.
This is salt marsh. It's a transition between the upland and the ocean. It's a very fertile area for wildlife. We're actually near the historic boardwalk in the town of Sandwich. There's some aquaculture in the area as well as wild harvest.
And oyster production on Cape Cod is a multi-million-dollar industry. It services both a farm industry as well as recreation and commercial harvest.
The natural resource concern here was water quality for this habitat, for the shellfish area, which is, of course, harvested for food.
Water quality had degraded significantly, and during the 1980s, the state stepped in and closed the shellfish resource area for the taking of shellfish because the bacteriological contaminants were so high that shellfish weren't suitable for human consumption anymore. It was discovered that inputs from septic systems and from roads and parking lots were the main culprit.
What's happening in this location is after heavy rains, the stormwater runoff discharges into the marsh, and it carries a bacterial load, which then causes the state to close this area for shellfish harvesting.
The first flush of runoff from a parking lot, from a roadway, from a watershed, particularly after a long dry period, contains about 85% fecal coliform. And so we base our design criteria on treating that pollutant?
We found 4 locations where the runoff was controllable and impactful. This is one of them. This is the boardwalk area. Across the marsh there was a parking lot that we also did some work on. We directed the runoff to these retention areas. They're basically sand beds or sand channels that have vegetation in them that perform the same function of removing the bacteria from the water flow.
It's adjacent to the lowest area of the parking lot, so that water can sheet flow directly off the asphalt, collect in a small sediment forebay, get some initial pre-treatment, and then flow into the main treatment cell, where there's sand filter media along with plant media. And the combination of those elements then treat the stormwater and clean it up before it ultimately either infiltrates into the ground or flows through a filtered outlet system to the adjacent marsh.
The Cape Cod Water Resources Restoration Project was an effort developed locally with local, county, and state partners to develop a plan for addressing resource concerns in salt marshes, anadromous fish runs, and shellfish harvesting areas. It covers all of Barnstable County, which is Cape Cod, with the exception of 2 large areas of federal land. The value of a project like this and the whole Cape Cod Water Resources Restoration Project is to not only improve the environment, but to support local farms and food production, to hopefully add to jobs in the area, and to maintain this sort of seaside community way of life with recreational shellfish harvesting.
So that is one of our some of the great work, examples, some of the great work we've got going on out there. And hopefully we'll be able to work with many of you all and doing projects like that or different or something that like we've never done before. And oh, let's see here. Stop the video, I think. So yeah, we look forward to working with you and getting to be a part of some of the interesting projects that you're going to bring to the table. Again, it starts off with the PIFR, then from the PIFR planning, watershed plan, either a watershed plan environmental assessment or EIS, then on to design and construction. And we look forward to working with you. And then back to you, Lark.
Thanks so much, Ralph. I never get tired of seeing our projects. They are so innovative and creative, and they save lives all around. So next up would be Jesse Wilson, our National Watershed Rehabilitation Program Manager. Jesse, are you all set? Looks like you are. Fantastic.
Yeah, Lark,
Over to you.
I'm all set, and thank you very much. And I really enjoyed Ralph's presentation. Very good project that he showed and the success story. And as you can see, the Watershed Ops program is a very broad program that addresses many, many resource issues out there. So I'm going to talk about the Watershed Rehabilitation Program, and it's somewhat of a subset of the Watershed Ops program, where Watershed Ops can address many, many new projects out there and a lot of issues. The Watershed Rehabilitation Program is really to address some current dams that have been installed through NRCS over the years. The Watershed Rehabilitation Program is a part of Public Law 83566, same as the Watershed Ops Act of 1954, as amended by Section 14. And what that does is provide technical and financial assistance to really rehabilitate NRCS project dams that do not meet current NRCS state dam design and safety criteria or performance standards, and also to extend the service life of the dam. What does rehabilitation mean? It means the completion of all work necessary to extend the service life of dams and to meet safety and performance standard. It doesn't do O&M for projects out there that need operation and maintenance where it hasn't been taken care of as it should. It also allows for decommissioning of dams that if that's the best route to go rather than rehabilitate the dam, it could be removed to the extent needed to restore the hydrology and protect both upstream and downstream. Let's look at what's happened over the last few years since 1948. There has been 11,850 dams constructed in 1,271 watersheds in 47 states. So there's quite a few dams out there, 11,850. And if you look at the graph right there, it shows that the majority of them were installed back in the late 50s and 60s. So you got a lot of dams that were installed many years ago that are approaching their service life. So most of them were designed for a 50-year life. So we're getting to a point where these dams need to be rehabilitated to remain safe and usable. Again, the project eligibility, as mentioned, are dams that were constructed under an NRCS program. Again, there's 83-566, Public Law 83-566, Public Law 78-534, the Pilot Watershed Program, which was started in the year 2000, and also the Resource Conservation and Development. Also, dams that are past their evaluated life or service life are eligible for the rehab program. But as I mentioned earlier, the O&M must be current, and the program is not just to do O&M on a dam. So what are the sponsor responsibilities in the rehab program? Well, they must have the power of eminent domain. They got to be able to acquire permits and licenses as required by federal and state law, ability to levy taxes, arrange to carry out activities that involve public participation in planning. It's very important that the communities are involved in the rehabilitation program. And then also commitment of funding for required cost share and funding for operation and maintenance once the dam is rehabbed. And we'll go into the cost share later on. Well, when the rehab program started, NRCS came up with a strategic plan to implement the program. And it really consists of 4 logical phases. There's assessment phase, and we'll talk about that in some detail. Then, of course, the plan of what are you going to do on this rehab. Design, once you get it planned, you want to design it, and then construction. So an assessment, we believe it should be done up within 12 months. And really, an assessment can be completed in much less than 12 months. I've seen them done in 90 days or less. Then the plan, we'd like for the plan to be completed within 18 months. That's the goal. And the design up to 24 months. That's our goal. And then construction, which would vary depending on the complexity and size of the dam, perhaps in 2 to 3 years. So that's our strategic plan in watershed rehabilitation. And of course, I'll go through each one of these phases. Okay, dam assessment. What the section 14I of the Public Law 566 says NRCS will assess the condition of all dams covered in the rehabilitation amendments. So all dams that were constructed through an NRCS authorized program, our goal is to assess the condition of all those dams with priority given to a high hazard dams. Okay, what are the hazard classes? Well, there's low hazard class, and that's dams where it's mainly in rural areas. It won't be any failure or loss of life. It's kind of minor damages or damages where it's not a lot of cost if it was to fail. Of the 11,850 dams, 8,360 dams are classified as low hazard potential dams. Then there's significant hazard dams that are predominantly rural or agriculture areas where failure may damage isolated homes, main highways, or minor railroads. And of those, there's 1,070 significant hazard dams. High hazard dams, that's where a failure may cause loss of life or serious damage to homes, industrial or commercial buildings, etc. And of those, there's 2,420 high hazard dams. So you can see there's quite a number of high hazard dams that were constructed through NRCS programs. Of those 2,420 dams, many of them were really designed as low or significant hazards. So we have several high hazard dams that were not designed to high hazard criteria at the time. And of course, the criteria has improved over the time. And so some of them, even when they're high hazard, when they were designed, do not meet current criteria today. So what is a dam assessment? And kind of, Ralph talked about a PIFR for watershed operations. This is not a PIFR, but it has all the information that you would need, kind of like a PIFR would for watershed operations. This is what you need basically for getting into the watershed rehabilitation. It's really a preliminary investigation of the condition of the dam. And normally this is where we have an on-site evaluation. We estimate a breach route and what's going to be inundated from a dam failure. What's the risk to the public should the dam fail? What's the population at risk? And then we have a procedure where we compute the failure and risk index. And then we would determine what the design and safety issues are, and of course come up with rehabilitation alternatives and estimated cost of the rehabilitation. So what the sponsor end up with is a dam assessment. It's a report. It's somewhat of a comprehensive report. It's not detailed to what you would do during planning, but it's a really a report that provides the sponsor with the condition of the dam. It's a written report, and it's provided to the sponsor so they can use that information, that data, to determine whether to proceed with rehabilitation of their aging dam. So the process is that the sponsor would request assistance for dam assessment by letter to the NRCS state conservationist. The funding priority will again be for high hazard dams. A report will be prepared by NRCS staff or engineering firm hired by NRCS, or if as a sponsor you would like to hire your own A&E firm or consultant to do the report, that's fine too. And it would be through an agreement with NRCS. And the cost of an assessment runs from anywhere from $20,000 to $35,000, and that is funded 100% by NRCS. And we feel that a dam assessment is a good start to find out exactly what the issue is with the dam. It's not necessarily required to get in the watershed rehabilitation program, but it's highly encouraged that a sponsor get an assessment prior to starting the design, the planning phase. Okay, now we reviewed what a dam assessment is. I'll talk about the next step, which would be planning. Here, again, the sponsor would submit a letter request with the following information for each dam. There's a list of things that should go along with the application, such as project name, dam number, project authority, 566, 534, RCND, or pilot watershed project, the location, addresses of contact person, year the dam was constructed, description of existing dam and any known rehabilitation needs, description of current benefits, any dam safety information or permit needs that you may know. And some of this information, if you as a sponsor do not know this, your local NRCS office or the state office has a lot of this information, can help you with that information. A sponsor also submits the application to the state agency having supervisory responsibility. That's Executive Order 12372. That's intergovernmental review of federal programs. So we want to get the appropriate state agencies involved in a rehab program. Okay, what's again, the sponsors commits to the following: assist in leading locally led planning effort. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we want the community involved, the stakeholders involved, the people upstream and downstream involved in the planning effort of this dam. Again, obtain the land rights using the power of attorney if that's necessary. In many cases, it's not necessary. And you provide the local cost share funds either in kind or by cash of 35% of the total eligible project cost, which I'll discuss a little later on. And then, of course, you got to enter into a new O&M agreement with NRCS and understand and follow the O&M agreement and plan. Provide the continuing O&M actions, permits, as I mentioned earlier, and make sure land treatment measures are installed upstream of the dam. And if you're going to do any kind of work ahead of time, then there needs to be a memorandum of understanding of what the sponsor is going to do, and we can credit the sponsor with the value of any in-kind contribution, but that needs to be decided, you know, in advance. The ranking will be based on potential for dam failure, consequences for that dam failure, what will happen if it did fail, and meeting the NRCS approved implementation plan, which Kevin will discuss at the end, what our goal is in this infrastructure funding. This is quite an opportunity for the rehab program because yearly we only have been receiving $10 million yearly through discretionary funding, but through the infrastructure we're getting $118 million, which allows us to do a lot more than we have been able to in the last few years. So great opportunity. So when you go through the planning process, you're going to go through the NEPA. You have to go through all the required NEPA laws and executive order compliance, and you're going to end up kind of like what Ralph said, either a plan environmental evaluation or environmental assessment or environmental impact statements. The majority of the rehab programs end up being an environmental assessment or an EA. And it requires a multidisciplinary team approach, engineers, economics, environmental staff, and we go through the planning process in the plan. And so I don't know whether you're familiar with it or not, but NRCS has 9 steps of planning. We use it in all our programs. We identify the problem and opportunities, determine the objectives, and as Ralph mentioned earlier, you know, purpose and need. What are the objectives? What are you trying to accomplish out there? And then what are the resources that's going to be affected by this project? And then we analyze the resource data, formulate any kind of alternatives, because we want to look at all our alternatives for the rehab of that structure. And then we evaluate the alternatives. And then at that point, the sponsor has a chance, an opportunity to make the decision, and then we implement the plan. And of course, we always go through, evaluate the plan once it's implemented. So most of the, well, I'd say all these dams, NRCS project dams, were installed through some watershed plan years ago. So when we go through this whole process, we'll end up with what we call a supplemental watershed for that structure. And through all the planning process and through all the meetings with communities, we come up with a plan that has several items in it that covers the purpose and need for action, the scope, the affected environment, alternatives, consequences, consultation, coordination, and public participation, the preferred alternative that was chosen by the sponsor, and other information to really document the rehabilitation of that dam. So it's a pretty intensive and comprehensive document. Okay, once the plan is completed, the sponsor signs the watershed agreement, which outlines what the responsibilities of not only the sponsor, but NRCS signs the agreement as well, what the responsibilities of NRCS are. The state conservation then submits that plan to the chief for authorization, and then once it's authorized, the plan is approved for funding dependent upon the availability of funds. So hopefully we'll have plenty of funds to fund the ones that come through this project that we're fixing to fund through the $118 million. Okay, NRCS provides 100% of the cost to develop the plan. And as I mentioned earlier, there's an 18-month goal to complete the plan. And again, the plan can be developed by NRCS staff, or many times NRCS contracts with the engineering firm to do the plan, or in many instances, the sponsor can complete the plan through an agreement with NRCS. Now, the agreement is a cooperative agreement that NRCS has with the sponsors. We're intimately involved with the whole planning process, and we have very many responsibilities in meeting the NEPA requirements that only NRCS can take the leadership on. So it would be a cooperative agreement with a sponsor, or we, NRCS, can do it in-house engineering firm. But in any case, the sponsor and NRCS work together to complete this watershed supplemental plan. Okay, after you got the plan and as a sponsor you decide you want to go into the design phase and on into construction, the next step would be your design. Well, you got to remember the design has to meet NRCS criteria. So we have a pretty extensive criteria that will be used in designing the rehab project, and it's basically covered in NRCS Technical Release 60, earth dams and reservoirs. And so that's available, and it has to be in accordance with TR60, the design. As Ralph mentioned in his presentation, NRCS will cover 100% of the design cost of the rehab project. And design, again, can be developed by NRCS staff or engineering firm hired by NRCS, or again, the sponsor can hire their own engineering firm and develop the design. You must remember that the design has to meet NRCS design criteria. We do have some statement of works developed that provide some pretty good guidance on the design process and what is required and all the steps that you need to go through in the design. The design, no matter who prepares the design, it requires review and concurrence by NRCS. So the designs will go through our National Design and Construction Center, and they will review the design at various stages, normally at the 30% or preliminary design stage, sometimes at the intermediate or 60% design stage, and definitely at the 90% stage where it's just about ready for completion. So all designs must go through NRCS review and concurrence. But once it's designed and you have an idea what it's going to cost to do the project, to do the rehab, then the sponsor can say, hey, I want to go into construction. So let's talk a little bit about the construction. Well, pre-construction responsibility, we got to have all the permits, and that's the responsibility of the sponsor. You got to agree to a new O&M agreement and plan, so that will be developed during the design phase and signed off prior to construction by the sponsor. Certify that you have current land rights to do the project. We get that information from the sponsor. And for high hazard dams, which most of them will be for the rehab program, you certify emergency action plan. So all of these things have to be in hand to NRCS prior to funding for construction. Again, we're in the same situation. Construction can be accomplished by an NRCS federal contract, or it could be a sponsor-led through an agreement with NRCS. So the opportunity to go either way is up to the sponsor, which is the easiest way for them to handle the construction contract. Okay, the cost share, NRCS provides 65% of the total project cost, not to exceed 100% of the construction cost. And I'll show that to you in just a few minutes. If you go back to the Watershed Program Manual, one of the purposes that Ralph discussed was rehabilitation. And in that table, it says installation construction no more than 100%. And engineering technical assistance, NRCS pays 100%. And real property rights, like a lot of purposes in watershed operations, is a sponsored cost. So what are project costs? Well, you go through the project cost and you total it all up, and 65% of it will be cost shared by NRCS, and 35% of it would be sponsors' cost. So if you look at federal technical assistance, the planning, design, and project administration, that is not, if it's done by NRCS, it's not considered part of the total project cost. So it would just be 100% NRCS. If the sponsor decides to do the planning, engineering, and project administration in-house, then that goes as a part of project cost, and that would be cost shared. So engineering and planning developed by the sponsor would be cost shared at 65-35. If it's done by NRCS, it would be paid 100% by NRCS. And of course, land rights is part of the total project cost. Natural resource rights, no. Permits, that's not part of project cost. Construction, yes, that's, you add that part of your project cost. Replacement in kind for relocation payments, yes. Required decent safety and sanitary, yes and no. So when you add it all up, we pay 65% of the total project cost, but you got to remember, we do not exceed the 100% of the construction cost. So if it's very high engineering or very high planning cost that's completed by the sponsor, we're still limited to 100% of the construction cost. That may seem kind of confusing to you, but I think once you get into it, it'll be a lot easier to understand it, and it's fairly straightforward. Well, there's been a lot of success stories on the NRCS rehabilitation program. As today, we have completed 172 rehab projects, and one of them was Hibernia Dam and Chambers Creek Reservoir in Chester County, Pennsylvania. And the sponsor of that was Chester County Water Resources Authority. And the issue with that dam, it no longer met current state or federal design criteria and performance standards. And it's a high hazard dam that was going to cause issues downstream, loss of life, if it was to fail. So through the dam assessment, they determined it was eligible, went through the planning and design stage, and the measures needed with a rock filter toe, a downstream bench to make the dam stable, installation of concrete cutoff wall and auxiliary spillway to keep it from eroding, with a construction cost of $960,535. So the consultant had provided flood protection, recreation, and water supply for the local communities. So in basic summary, in regards to which phase you're in, the sponsor submits a phase request to NRCS State Office for project funding with required documents that we discussed earlier in my presentation in regards to what phase. All the phases have certain required documents. The NRCS State Conservation will review the request, determine if it's eligible, and submit to national headquarters for funding. And then once it's decided that it's going to be funded with the available funding that we have, then the sponsor will receive notice of funding approval. So it's a pretty straightforward process. Hopefully this gives you a good overview of the Watershed Rehab Program, and we look forward to you submitting requests for funding. Lark, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. And we're just going to go to our break here, and we will circle back in 10 minutes. So we'll say 11:10. And we'll see you all then. In the meantime, we have some more success stories here during the break time for you to enjoy. And again, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A and we'll address them at the very end of the session. All right, we'll see you at 11:10.
During the floods of 96 and 97, the whole downtown did flood. So there was just a lot of feel to the residents that there wouldn't be a way of building business and handling business expansion unless there was a change that happened. So the roads that you see around this area were all just covered with water, where you could literally kayak down them in this area of town. When I look at the town, in contrast to what it was before the flooding, there's new businesses that have cropped up around the main street and throughout different areas that really were struggling to decide if they should remain if it was a flooded town. And there were literally some buildings that were needing to be taken down. So those have been replaced with new structures because people are able to invest in a new structure and not worry about its flooding. Around town, related to the flood control project, it's very positive. Growth of the community has happened since then, whereas before people were probably a little more paranoid about growth related to business or their own investment in their home. So once the project was put into place, they really were able to think about the economy differently than they had in the past, and their own personal possessions, where they stored them and what they did with them. There's a lot more opportunity around what you put in your garage, for instance. Before that, you pretty much knew that things in your garage would flood, and then after the flood control project came into play, we watched other towns around us have big floods, and Warren did not. So you could see the plan in action with it actually working for the community, which was really helpful. We really have a sense that you can grow your business and that there's stability around being able to make change and have it not be affected by floods anymore. So some of the businesses probably have made a choice to come to Warren, whereas before it would have been hard to market to them and pull them into the community. There's a few new buildings that came up since the flood, and if the project wasn't in place to have the diversion and impoundment, I don't think they would have chosen to be here, or they would have been very nervous about it, or even just worried about the cost of insurance that they would have to incur. And you know, it's the money out of your pocket for insurance, but I always think it's the wear and tear on you as you deal with the flood, that you just have all of that work that needs to happen.
Installing a flood control project like the Snake River project, it involves many entities. First of all, it's locally led, it's locally driven, so it's the local people who initiated the project. We're always in contact and working hand in hand with the sponsors. In this case, was the City of Warren and the Watershed District. The main driving force from the City of Warren to get this project implemented was the mayor, Richard Nelson. We're also working with units of government of the state government, like the Minnesota DNR, who was very involved with fish migration in the Snake River, and they had a lot of requirements and dictated what we could build, and they had to issue a permit to us to do these. I think the project was a success. And the one reason I say that is during construction, the off-channel storage area was completed, and we were starting work on the diversion structure. And that spring, they had a flood event. We did not have the project completed, but the components that were in place were enough to prevent any major damage, any flooding in the town of Warren. So right there, we already alleviated a lot of damages in town. The city itself was very appreciative of the project going through, and they've been very appreciative of the benefits that have been provided by the project. I'm very proud of the Snake River Flood Control Project and its effect, its benefits on the city of Warren. It was one of the last of our PL 566 projects for the NRCS in Minnesota, and I was very proud to work on it and be associated with it.
I would consider every watershed project that I've had the opportunity to work on a huge success. Why? Because we have provided protection to a large amount of agricultural land and a large population of rural and suburban population. We truly thought that this community, if we didn't get this project done, would be non-existent today. Everybody would have moved on there, couldn't afford it to live there. It got damaged that often. Now with some of the changes in the rainfall amounts and how severe the events are, I'm even more confident that that would have happened if this project did not go through. This was necessary to save a community.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back. Thank you so much again for taking time out of your day to join us. And now next up is John Dervish, who's going to focus on the Emergency Watershed Protection Program. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in your Q&A. Okay, over to you, John. Are you ready to go?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Lark.
Thanks.
All right, well, welcome back, everybody. We're going to go ahead and turn the corner on this presentation and kind of round up with EWP going forward. As you guys and gals heard, our programs sit in USDA, and the EWP program is a program specifically meant to address flooding and erosion concerns that are results of natural occurrences and natural disasters. Things like fires, floods, windstorms, anything that can be classified as kind of a natural occurrence across the landscape. And if those events cause a watershed impairment, which has a specific definition, but if there are flooding and erosion concerns, then the EWP program can be activated. And these can range from, a single stream bank to, entire stretches of waterways. So it's a very flexible program in that regard. And just as a preview of what we'll be getting into here over the next 15 minutes is that, as I said, a natural disaster event can cause a watershed impairment, and the function of that watershed is decreased to a point that something needs to be done. At that point, sponsors such as yourself can formally request assistance, and that can be done that's done at the state level. And then that prompts NRCS to go ahead and document the eligible activities out on the landscape and in the watershed impairment, and also provide cost estimates. And then at that point, once that process is run through, then the sponsor and NRCS can enter into a formal agreement and actually carry out the emergency work. Just kind of an example here, this is a before and after of a landslide over in Wyoming. This particular project had a sponsor, which was the Sheridan School District, who actually has an administration building on the right side of this picture. And this slide was going to eventually impair the stream flow to the point that the school district property was going to be threatened. NRCS was able to provide assistance for the erosion prevention, and that's specifically kind of, you see the bottom structural riprap and structural measures, along with some stream widening to kind of maintain the hydrologic flow. And then the city was able to pay for things like the walkway and the aesthetics through state grants. The EWP authority, it's a fun little authority because it's literally only one sentence long, and so that provides us a wide berth of flexibility to make sure that we're able to quickly and accurately address the problems out there that might be in the watersheds. But basically, the Secretary of Ag is authorized to undertake watershed protection measures, including floodplain easements. That is an option when NRCS determines that's the most prudent choice for the area. And those measures have to be for runoff reduction and soil erosion prevention. Have to be in cooperation with the landowners. This is a 2 thumbs up process, one from NRCS and one from the sponsor. They have to be necessary to protect lives and property. And those are when something like a natural occurrence causes a sudden impairment to the watershed. The program's administered in all 50 states, District of Columbia, and the rest of the U.S. territories in areas throughout the Pacific Basin. So just to clarify again, EWP provides recovery assistance. 2 kind of things that can kind of put EWP on your radar as a sponsor is if there's a federal emergency declared by FEMA. That's something that will kind of make the program available. But also if it's a localized event where the intensity is high, but it's not as widespread to warrant a FEMA declaration, well, the NRCS state conservationist can go ahead and declare, hey, for this particular area, we have a local watershed and emergency, and we should be looking to provide assistance through EWP. So that again is made at the NRCS state level as well. And then with that, it's just looking to kick off some NRCS and local coordination. We'd be looking for EWP opportunities to provide protection from flooding and soil erosion. And then what EWP actually provides assistance for will be EWP measures that remove the threats imposed by the watershed impairment, measures that restore the natural environment, and also typically NRCS can use our standard conservation practices to kind of guide the planning and design of the emergency recovery work. How to contact NRCS, we'll come back to this, and the slide deck will be provided to you, so you can kind of use these emails or these web addresses. But local is always best. So as mentioned before, you can talk to your local USDA service center on the NRCS side of the house, and if there'll be someone there who will be able to help you with EWP, and if not, they'll probably refer you to the EWP state program manager as well, and that's a person who's intended to stay current on all kind of EWP activities within their area of responsibility. And as mentioned previously, the ultimate decision maker for implementing the program within their area of responsibility are the NRCS state conservationists. Again, just one more time to reiterate that a natural event causes a watershed impairment. There has to be an imminent threat, and so we have now a watershed emergency, and that's the E and the W in the EWP program. Property that can be used, property that can be protected by the EWP program include, kind of structural and built things in the environment, houses and buildings, roads and utilities, dams and flood control structures, things that are property that's actually sitting out there, and we can provide flooding and erosion protection for these permanent structures. EWP program can't be used for standard kind of cropland, timberland, but USDA does have other programs that are probably honestly better suited to provide protection and relief from those hazards. So look to your USDA service center, and if EWP is not the appropriate vehicle, perhaps there's another USDA program that they can assist you with. EWP sponsors, EWP assistance, both technical assistance, meaning goods and services that our staff can provide, but also financial assistance can be provided to recipients, and this comes in two flavors. The majority of time we'll be providing assistance directly to sponsors because that's who we're working with on actually implementing it. However, if an easement is decided the preferable alternative by NRCS, then when it comes time to provide that financial assistance can be provided directly to landowners. And so it kind of it has the ability to skip the sponsor step in that regard. But working with your state program manager for EWP will kind of help guide and point the right direction and implementation for that. Eligible sponsors, this is similar to the other two programs as well. We're talking about state subdivisions of the state, qualified Indian tribes and tribal organizations, and local units of government, and all of which must have some sort of a legal interest and responsibility for the area. And then sponsor responsibilities, kind of what NRCS will be looking for help on, will be their sponsors will be responsible for their share of project costs as determined by NRCS, and that can come in the form of cash or in-kind services. Sponsors are required for obtaining property rights, water rights, regulatory permits, things that kind of anything below the federal level, we'd be looking for the sponsor to provide those. Sponsors, if required, will be required to sign an O&M agreement as determined necessary by NRCS. These can, if we're looking at something as simple as debris removal, a lot of times there won't be an O&M requirement. However, some more complex structures probably have a lifespan that will need some sort of operation and maintenance agreement between the sponsor and NRCS. And also the EWP is intended to be used when a sponsor has insufficient resources to provide relief from the hazard. So what about timelines? So sponsors, again, this kicks off with a formal request by the sponsor for assistance, and that needs to come within 60 days of the disaster or when access to the site is determined safe. and a formal request must be made by the sponsor at that point. We provided a template letter. It's in our sponsor guide that's on the EWP website. And also your state program manager can work with you, kind of making sure it's completely and accurately filled out so that we can have a complete application or a complete request at the time and make sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. But it's a fairly straightforward process once you actually start having discussions with your state about the EWP program. Before we hit again on some of the things EWP can do, let's just kind of the program has some regulatory requirements that prevent it from doing a couple of things. I'll just go through them real quick. The same structural practice can't be funded 3 times within 10 years. The EWP funds can't be used for operation and maintenance. EWP funds can't be used to repair or maintain transportation facilities, utilities, or similar type facilities. EWP funds shouldn't be used on the federal lands if it's found to augment the appropriation of another federal agency. EWP funds aren't used for non-structural management practices such as conservation tillage. That's kind of a self-fulfilling limitation. EWP won't be used to provide protection from coastal erosions to beaches, dunes, shorelines, and including those along the Great Lakes. These are sort of out of the watershed concept, and it's also kind of out of NRCS's wheelhouse and ability to provide good service. So we would, if those are the types of situations, we might want you to work with another federal agency better equipped to provide that assistance. And also lastly, the recovery measures, if they're eligible for the emergency conservation practice, or I'm sorry, the emergency conservation program administered by the Farm Service Agency, our sister agency out there, we would want and encourage you guys to use that program, as it's probably better suited for things like the ag land threats. Here's just kind of an example of a small scale example of where EWP was able to provide erosion protection. Here we have a head cut that's coming into a road, and it's also threatening. There's some other structures off site that eventually are going to get eaten through in the next major rain event. So EWP was able to provide erosion protection on the banks of that particular stream. The sponsor was ultimately also responsible for things like the fence and things like the road improvements. Those are all covered by the sponsor, but EWP was able to help with specifically the erosion protection in this case. Practice modifications and increases is just kind of a side note. You know, cost share modifications, not only will we cost share on the measures for flooding and erosion protection, but we'll also cost share on measures for technology advancements, changes in construction techniques, and any federal permitting requirements that come through the planning process. Then those are things that are cost shared as well on the NRCS side. Not cost shared will be things like increased level of protection if a particular structure has a certain design threshold. EWP funds can't be used to cover protections up and beyond that. It's not a new protection type program per se. Eligible EWP practices. These are all the time EWP conditions, and every single EWP measure and practice must provide protection from flooding and soil erosion. They must reduce the threat to life or property. They must restore the hydrologic capacity to the natural environment to the maximum extent practicable, and they must be economically and environmentally defensible and technically sound. And we have processes for working out each of these items, but you know, it's just very important that we're doing good work out there in the landscape through the EWP program. Here's another EWP example of erosion protection. Here we have a bend of a stream that's threatening an airport. EWP was able to come in and provide stabilization and protection for the stream or the river bank there. The things like the road surface or the runway surface and such is still the responsibility of the sponsor, but EWP was able to provide the erosion protection to make sure that there's no longer a threat and there's no longer an immediate threat to that particular runway. So as mentioned previously, how do we kind of progress through this? It starts off with the informal discussions between sponsors and NRCS staff. And if it looks like it's something that that the sponsor wants to pursue, they can go ahead and put in a formal request that obligates NRCS for action, and NRCS must then complete a damage survey report. This is similar to kind of the assessment or the PIFR type phase, but it's the initial planning phase of EWP. And NRCS will complete this DSR, and the damage survey report will include the proposed emergency practices and provide cost estimates. And that DSR is then completed within 60 days of your formal request. And then if funds are available and the DSR meets the programmatic requirements, then the projects and the practices in that damage survey report will be funded, and funds will be allocated for those exact activities, and they'll be provided to the NRCS state conservationists so that then they can enter into an agreement with the local sponsor. Planning considerations, these are just in the rule for EWP, and as Jesse mentioned, we still are running through the 9-step planning process, but special consideration needs to be made for EWP for things like cultural wildlife resources. They need to be the least environmentally damaging, but that needs to be balanced with both economical and practical solutions. So it's a balancing act we have to do, but it's important work that we need to do to make sure that, again, that we're putting good work out on the landscape. Again, after the request came in, we did the DSR, and the funds are allocated within the EWP. Then NRCS funds are made available, and these come in 2 flavors, both financial assistance funds, and that's used for NRCS's share of the construction cost, and technical assistance funds that can be used for planning, design, contract administration, construction oversight. So now those funds, let's say those funds are available for the project. Those funds can then be formally obligated, meaning formally put into an agreement with the sponsor. And that agreement with the sponsor will detail the responsibilities and cost share between NRCS and the sponsor. And it will document if funding will be provided to a sponsor based on a sponsor's willingness to contribute to kind of planning, design, and construction. And these are case-by-case type situations, depending on a sponsor's area of amount of expertise versus NRCS's area and amount of expertise, and then these are worked out individually. So again, it's a very wide array that can be pursued, but we do that intentionally so that we can have max flexibility moving forward in these emergency situations. Again, just the funding type again that we have funds for both construction costs and the technical services, and again those are allotted and obligated and put to the elements that can either be passed over to the sponsor for the sponsor to carry out certain responsibilities, or kept within NRCS, or NRCS can also contract that out through a federal contract. Construction time limits. So the majority of projects will come through the standard timeline. When the DSR is completed and the funds are ultimately allocated to that project, that kicks off a clock in the code of that's codified in the EWP rule, and it's 220 days that construction has to be completed, and that's intended to reiterate the fact that this is an emergency program and we have to act promptly. Exigencies, that's a type of EWP work that needs immediate action, as in, something's bad is going to happen in the next few weeks and it's going to get worse. So these are the top funding priorities for the EWP program. And we have a couple of streamlined approaches when these situations arise. And so specifically when funds are allocated for a project, we looked at those measures are completed within 10 days of construction being completed. And that those types of measures can also be temporary in nature, and we can come back and finish it up with a more permanent solution with the 220-day window. cost share and construction costs. These are somewhat standardized, but for the majority of construction costs, we'll be looking to the sponsor to provide 25% of the construction costs in the form of cash or in-kind services. That does change if a county or tribal area meets the limited resource area definition, and your NRCS state program manager will help you kind of identify these areas. But in those cases, we look to the sponsor to only provide 10% of the construction costs in the form of cash or in-kind services. And then the sponsor contributions, hit on the top one before and hit on the bottom one before. You know, it's just kind of, all this will be formalized in the formal agreement. And then in conclusion, it's a fairly straightforward process. We go through hundreds of agreements a year with sponsors, so it's an active program with lots of projects going on across the country and regions. So it's a fairly worn-in process and established process, and we're happy to help you guys and gals get the emergency relief for, as I said, the soil and erosion concerns that are the result of natural disasters. And again, you know, start with your local office as best as you can, and they will be able to kind of point you in the right direction on what you need to be doing in order to enter the EWP program. So with that, Lark, I'd like to kick it back to you.
Thanks so much, John. That was a great presentation. I'm going to leave this slide up a little bit longer so people can kind of jot things down. And just to let you know, in case you're furiously trying to take notes as we're sharing the vast information, don't worry. We will be posting the video, the live recording, and a PDF of the slide deck. So on that note, I'm going to introduce Kevin, who will then go over the timelines for submitting an application. So over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Lark. Thank you, Ralph, Jesse, and John. Great information, great presentations. Just wanted to reiterate a few things for everyone on the call so that you will be able to at least know where we are as far as timelines and expectations, so we can communicate to everyone on the same page. So as far as it relates to actually getting this work done, we've established timelines for when we expect certain types of work to be done based on the phase of the work for the different programs. And these are our goals that we want to accomplish working with you as local sponsors to make these programs more efficient and to move through in a timely fashion. Whenever we don't meet these timelines, we do want to go back and reevaluate and determine if there's some things out there that need to be done in such a way that we can improve efficiencies to meet these target timelines. So as far as it relates to assessments in the rehab program, we do expect those to be completed within 12 months. And as Jesse had mentioned, many of them, well, some of them are done in less than 12 months. But we are working with the states to make sure that we are able to complete that in 12 months. As far as it relates to the PIFRs, the feasibility studies that are done in the Watershed Ops program, it should take roughly 6 months. There may be some times when it may go a little bit longer depending on the complexity of the situation, but these are very basic type of documents that really shouldn't take much more than that to really complete. As it relates to the more of the NEPA documents, the Plan EA and the EIS, for those, ideally it should take about 18 months. And I know some of you are thinking, wow, that doesn't sound realistic. Well, if we look at the time frames and we've looked at the minimum times that are allowed for reviews and kind of looked at all the steps necessary for a normal planning effort, we've come up with about 18 months is about what it should take on average. We understand that there are some times when it will take longer, depending once again on the complexities of the project. And then there are some times when it may take less. However, our goal is to work towards us getting to a position where we can complete these types of projects in that time frame so that we can move on to the implementation, which is where we really can help you the most. When we get to the implementation is where we actually get to the point of putting things, generating work products that you can actually utilize to address the issues that are on the landscape. We move out of just the planning of it and actually doing work products that can get you what you need to fix the problem. So when we get to that implementation phase, after we've authorized those designs within 18 months, plans within 18 months. When we get to the design phase of implementation, most of those designs should be able to be completed with less than 24 months. That's the goal that we're shooting towards, and anytime we can't meet that, once again, we do want to reevaluate and see where there are some issues, unless there's obviously some unique circumstances and we understand that it will take a little bit longer. And then when it gets to construction, ideally for construction under ops or rehab, especially rehab, it should be completed within 2 to 3 years. Ops, you may go a little bit longer, but ideally 2 to 3, maybe 5 on ops sometimes. Once again, with some certain complexities, those are the types of timelines we are looking at. So in EWP, we had said before, 220 days is the ideal time frame for those recovery projects that are non-exigency. So those are the time frames that we want to work towards and work with you to accomplish. So that means a lot has to happen for us to meet those time frames, and a lot of things need to be in order. A lot of communication needs to be clear and working together. So once again, the bipartisan infrastructure deal had a plan requirement that we had to put together to kind of outline what's our strategy for getting it implemented. And then within 90 days, reporting some information back to Congress on what we are going to do. So as part of that package, we were to hold some meetings and some trainings. This is one of them. So you can see we held one on the 22nd where he started the agency coordination after the president signed the legislation into law. And then on the 30th and the 2nd of December, we did 2 internal trainings to prepare our NRCS staff to be able to move these programs forward and know exactly how to get the funding request done. I'd mentioned that before. And then yesterday on the 6th, we did our first public teams meeting, live meeting, just like today. So that's what you see here. These 2 meetings were done for the general public to let you know how to access this funding. And then on the 30th, by the end of this year, we're hoping to have the updates completed for our National Watershed Program Manual. Those updates will provide for better clarity and helping our agency as well as partners and sponsors to understand how best to implement these programs. So that a lot of work has gone into updating that policy, and we expect to have a completed document by the end of this year. And then as far as it relates to you, as it relates to funding decisions, that's what everyone wants to know. Ralph had mentioned we are asking our states to work towards getting us their preliminary request in, initial request in, because the requests have to be full. So the full initial request in by January the 19th. And then any additional requests that they want to submit after that, they can keep submitting them because the door won't close. We're going to keep taking requests from here on out. As long as there's funding, we're going to keep taking requests. However, the reason we set that January 19th target date is that will give us enough information by then so that we can get our 90-day report back to Congress that we're required by the laws of this bill, this legislation, to get back to show what we're going to fund and provide them our list of funding projects. So with that being said, please get your request in as soon as you can so our states can get working on it and get those requests in to us so we can make a review and recommendation for agency leadership to make the final decision on what projects will be funded. And then after that, we expect that we should be able to actually release those funds and put them into agreements or contracts to get the work started and then eventually get the work completed. And that release of funds should take place in February. We're targeting February 18th for that. There's an apportionment process that goes through. We're going through now. That funds actually are not in our account just yet. So once the apportionment is done and the funds are in the agency's account, we'll be fully in a position to be able to make those allocations. We just need to make a final decision on which projects to allocate to. So that's the timeline. That's what we're looking to do. We need your help, obviously, in accomplishing that. And as we're able to do that, then we can work together to make sure that we're successful. So what I want to do now is take as much time as we need to get your questions answered. And I know we have quite a few questions. So Lark, let's get started on answering some questions. I think there are almost 30 questions or so in here. So we're going to get started on that.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Kevin. And again, I just want to reiterate that I will be sending everyone a link to the website where you can find the recording and all the PDF information. And I'll be doing that to all the participants in an email after the meeting. And so for our first question, Kevin, we have from Marianne from Caddy Prairie Conservancy. She'd like to know if nonprofit organizations are eligible to apply for the WFPO program alone without an additional sponsor.
So if the nonprofit is like a state agency or district type of an organization that's established under a state law, that's basically what we would call a subdivision of the state, then that entity would be eligible if they're part of a state organization or falls within a state under a state law. But just to say just a nonprofit in general, no, you wouldn't be able to if you do not meet the requirements of a local sponsor. So to be a local sponsor, you have to be either a state agency, a subdivision of the state, which could be a nonprofit if it's a part of the state government. And then if you are a local municipal type of a government agency like county, city, something like that. And then tribal organizations would also qualify as sponsors. And those sponsors have to have the ability to have some control and interest in the projects that they're actually administering.
Okay, and then she also has another question. In the rehab program, do eligible projects have to involve a dam originally constructed through an NRCS watershed program and be past their evaluated life, or involve a dam originally constructed through an NRCS watershed program or be past their evaluated life?
All right, great question. So to be eligible for rehab, it first has to be a structure that was constructed using one of the four programs that Jesse identified. That's the Public Law 83-566, Public Law 574, and then the pilot program, and then the RC&D program is what you probably, most commonly know, the RC&D program. So one of those three authorities have to be have been utilized to install the project. So now after that's done, once we've cleared that, if that's the case, then you can look at the actual structure itself. So if it's a high hazard structure that has reached its design life or service life, we can address it that way and say we were looking to extend its service life. That's an eligible purpose for doing watershed rehabilitation. Or it could be a structure that was originally designed and constructed as significant or low, and then now we're going in and upgrading that structure to meet current dam safety requirements because it's actually now a high hazard structure, but it may not have met its evaluated life. It may only be, let's say less than 20, 30 years or so, but land use changes have facilitated that it's now a higher hazard class and it doesn't meet those standards. So as long as it was funded by one of the four programs under those four authorities, and it is either going to be able to meet the current dam safety requirements. So that means it was low, now it's high, or something of that nature, and it's going to extend the service life. So one of those two reasons for a project that meets those four authorities.
Okay, thanks. Next question, is the PL 566 being funded for new flood control berm projects now?
So I think you're talking about like a flood control dam. So, doing new dams is somewhat not as easy as it was in the 40s and 50s, when the program was first started. But if there is a need to install a new watershed structure, such as a dam, we would engage in a project that includes dams as part of it. So, whatever we determine to be the purpose and need and the alternative that is the selected alternative, if that includes a structure that is a dam, then we would include that in as part of the project.
And the next question is about acres. I believe no more than 25,000 acres funded, question mark?
I think the person is probably asking about 25,000 acre feet for a structure, I think is what they're probably asking. So there's a limit there on any individual structure, and that is in the statute, cannot have more than a total storage capacity of 25,000 acre feet is what they're probably asking about. So that's per structure though, not per project.
Okay, great. And then how is a new sponsor defined?
A new sponsor would be an entity that we're not currently working with. So what I mean by that is we have a lot of projects out there now, and I did a presentation a few weeks ago that really showed kind of the distribution of where the work is today. You know, and a lot of it is in the same place, and that's the reality of where we are. You know, so we're trying to encourage sponsors who may have work and opportunities throughout the landscape of this country to also participate. So, you know, to spread out the breadth and the reach of this program to demonstrate its ability to be effective in other parts of the regions of the country. So a new sponsor will be someone who's not currently working on one of our project in one of our programs. Or so if you're wanting to do a rehab project and you don't have any rehab projects that you're currently working on, then that will be considered a new project sponsor. Not saying you've never worked with NRCS or something like that. We're just saying you don't currently have a project in the system now that's being worked on. We're looking to bring in more new people. Now, we're taking all requests. There's nothing saying we can't work on projects that are not with new sponsors. So I want to be clear in what we're saying. What we're saying is we want to expand the program and make sure that there's opportunities and make sure that we work towards getting more folks to the table. That does not in any way mean that we're not going to fund projects with that, you know, with existing sponsors. No one has ever said that. So what only thing that's been said is that we do want to encourage new sponsors to get involved in the programs. And that's all that's being said.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, what do you do when a dam has reached its evaluated life, needs work beyond O&M, and the original sponsor no longer wants to be involved?
Yeah, that's a tough one because any work that we do in the rehabilitation program or the watershed operations program has to be done through a local sponsor. So the first thing is you have to identify a local sponsor. So if the original sponsors do not want to be engaged, that may be a time for us to work with the state. And if it's a dam, then, you know, we definitely want to engage the state dam safety officials and that agency to determine if there is a viable sponsor out there, especially if it's a high hazard dam that poses a threat to life and property. So we do want to engage those individuals to see if we can identify a viable sponsor. There's only one state that doesn't have a state dam safety program, but with all the rest of them, there are at least state agencies that regulate the safety of those structures. We want to work as closely with those dam safety agencies to determine if we can identify a viable sponsor and then work to secure a viable sponsor. And then once a sponsor steps forward and is willing to take on the project, we can work towards doing what's needed to be done to rehabilitate the structure if it's rehab eligible, or to do a new project to replace the structure if it's one that we can do that to do a new plan or a new project. But we definitely have to have a local sponsor. There's no way we could do work or have authority to do work without a local sponsor.
And then your next question is also on dam rehabilitation. They would like to know, what if the design is done? Can we actually start the review by NRCS and move to construction if approved?
So first of all, if there's an authorized plan that has been authorized by the chief of NRCS, so if you have a plan that's been authorized by the chief of NRCS to do this work, so if this is rehab, then you need a supplemental plan to do the rehabilitation work that has been authorized by the chief of NRCS. If you have that, then we can discuss the design. So then if you have that and there's a design that's completed and it has been approved by NRCS, so that means our NRCS state office staff, including the state engineer, has signed off on this project design, then we can move forward and have a discussion about requests for construction. Now, the only caveats to any of that is if any of this work that I just mentioned was done more than 5 years ago. And the reason is because at that point we have to have a reasonable expectation to say, all right, let's do our due diligence to say, has there been any major changes within this watershed now that was not there 5 years ago that would facilitate the need for maybe supplementing the plan again, or even modifying the plan or modifying the design. So we need to do what's called a reaffirming of the feasibility of the plan or the design to make sure that it's still feasible and we don't just move straight into construction. So I would say in that situation, work with your local NRCS state office and determine whether or not you have an authorized plan or supplemental plan to do the work. And then 2, make sure you have a approved design and that make sure both of them are still feasible. And then we can entertain requests for construction.
Okay, great. I'm kind of scrolling through the questions here and focusing on all the dam related ones for the beginning. So the next one is, it was stated that priority funding would be given to dam safety dams. Is this by today's dam safety permits requirements or the old height and acre feet standards?
So we don't have a specific priority for dam safety dams. I'm not 100% following the question there. Our priorities are for projects that are going to be ready for construction, projects that are out in the western regions of the United States where they're going to address drought-related issues for the western states, and then projects in limited resource areas or communities, and we define what those are, and projects with benefits to historically underserved communities, and projects with benefits to tribal communities and organizations. Those are the primary priorities when it comes to these project implementation funding. As far as dam safety, we do prioritize the work for rehabilitation for high hazard dams, but not quite understanding the full question there. Maybe that person can send me a direct email and with your specific question, and we can work through what you're asking there, because we don't have a specific priority associated with dam safety. We have priorities for high hazard structures, and there's a risk associated, so that may be what the person is talking about. We're only going to, for right now, do rehab on high hazard structures that are high risk.
Okay. And then is there a resource GIS layer or list of NRCS dams that are available to watershed planners?
So what we've been doing at this point is encouraging individuals to visit the National NID, the National Inventory of Dams website. That's a public website that basically captures an inventory of all the dams throughout the nation, and NRCS structures are listed there as well. So we encourage that. We may in the future do some additional work to through some of our different apps and website information, provide some additional guidance on eligible projects and things of that nature. But for right now, we refer folks to the National Inventory of Dams for any listing of public dams and things of that nature.
Okay, next up is a question on the watershed and flood prevention program. They want to know if the funds can be used to upgrade township, county, and state road crossings to reduce flood damage.
So addressing flood damage reduction and things of that nature are eligible purposes for the watershed program. As Ralph had mentioned in his presentation, you first need to go through the planning process and identify the purpose and need for the project, and then identify measures that will be able to address the purpose and need. So if through the planning effort we determine that there's a need to make improvements to the hydraulics of the road and road crossings, then there may be incorporated into the plan for that purpose a measure that addresses road crossings and for flood protection or flood reduction. So that may be a component, but just to say, are they eligible? That's not an eligible purpose, but that may be a measure that helps to facilitate accomplishing one of the eligible purposes. So, that may be a possible measure that would be included.
Okay, and then the next question is there a quick way to determine whether or not your watershed already has a plan? Are existing plans, watershed plans, available online, or does each project sponsor require their very own watershed plan?
Great question. So what I would encourage there is that you do definitely work with your local NRCS offices, and ultimately there will have to be most likely some conversation with the state office and your local, our NRCS office in your local state to determine what watershed plans are already existing in your community. So I would encourage you to definitely reach out to your NRCS state office to determine if there is an existing watershed plan. We do have an archive of plans. There are over 2,100 or so watershed plans out there, and about, I think, 1,200 or so have have dams in them, but there are several, almost 900 that don't have dams, but still, like I said, there's over 2,100 plans out there now. So of those 2,100 plus plans, there may be one in your watershed. So I would say just reach out to your local NRCS state office and ask them if they have a copy of any kind of watershed plan in your community. And as you're doing your PIFR and all of that, those are the types of research things that will come up in the research to determine if there is already an existing plan. So we'll be able to tell you that.
Okay, great. And then in the past, nonprofit organizations have been able to request floodplain easements for affected lands through the EWP. Is this still the case?
So as far as nonprofits, that question is similar to the first question. You still would have to be an eligible sponsor to request assistance. That's the first thing. For floodplain easements, the one caveat there is local landowners, individuals can request assistance for floodplain easements, especially if we're doing a sign up for floodplain easements. So there is the ability for assistance to be provided to local landowners if there is a need for a floodplain easement. But as far as nonprofits, there isn't any specific, unless the nonprofit is the landowner, there isn't any specific eligibility requirement there that the nonprofit would meet unless, once again, I expressed earlier, they're part of a subdivision of the state or something.
Okay, thanks. And then there's a participant who has a watershed operations project in play that apparently started out around 18 million, and then due to increases in pipe materials and construction inflation, the current construction estimate is now over 25 million in construction. The environmental assessment document is ready to submit for review. Can we submit a project for over 25 million in construction with an environmental assessment, or what options do we have? Is changing to an EIS or phasing the project an option?
Yeah, if the project is going to be in excess of 25 million, you will need to, because of the scope and complexity of the project, you would need to then conduct an EIS, an environmental impact statement. So at that point, yes, you would want to do an EIS for that particular project.
Okay, and the next is regarding the EWP. Is there any resolution between the FEMA NRCS conflict regarding statutory authority of funding disaster repairs? Specifically, FEMA defers to NRCS, but NRCS does not always have EWP funding. Then FEMA says no duplication of benefits. This is NRCS's responsibility, and the local agencies are left funding disaster repairs on our own.
Yeah, so last year we established a interagency plan of operations with FEMA as part of the existing MOU that was signed with them in 2018. As part of that plan, we agreed that we would do more on-the-ground coordination between FEMA and NRCS as it relates to these federally aided projects, these federal projects. So that's one that's like a Stafford Act disaster. So as we coordinate with them, the decision from FEMA has been that if another agency has authority to do the work, then it would not be eligible for assistance under the FEMA disaster recovery programs that they offer. So if it's eligible for EWP assistance, the guidance by FEMA has been that they're going to, it would not be eligible for then FEMA disaster recovery assistance. So what we've done is we've worked with local communities and encouraged that, for those specific ones, if we've made that identification and we've communicated with FEMA that it is eligible for EWP assistance, but there's just an absence of funding, and I think that is the way the question was posed, there's an absence of funding, then we would put it on our wait list and provide funding in the event that funding is secured. We do have a current wait list that we expect to be remedied here in the coming weeks, given that there has been funding provided for the program. So we're expecting to be able to address that. So we do encourage you to work with your local NRCS offices so that if there is a need for EWP assistance, that you get that need on our wait list. And if FEMA and NRCS have agreed that this is a EWP eligible project, you definitely want to make sure that you have a DSR for it. We are working to make improvements on our collaboration with FEMA to make sure that that we coordinate better and we're out there on the ground more frequently. And we reduce any confusion that you're seeing. So sounds like that may have been an early one, or at any rate, there's an area there where it sounds like we can do some improvement in our coordination to make sure that both federal agencies are on the same page as we communicate to you on how to get assistance for your recovery.
Okay, great. And I think John did touch on this next question, but probably need to reiterate it, is can the EWP be used to protect agricultural fields?
Yeah, EWP wouldn't be eligible for protection of simply just cropland. So you would most likely want to be involved in ECP, which is a program offered by a sister agency, the Farm Service Agency.
And then can EWP funds be used for a chronic flooding problem caused by historic logging? It's not a discrete emergency, but due to increases in storm flow, it's a serious problem impacting local landowners and salmon habitat.
Yeah, so EWP has to be tied to a specific disaster. So you have to have a specific disaster that occurred that caused the sudden impairment in the watershed. That's the first thing. But if you have a long-standing issue within the watershed that is creating flooding-related issues because of deforestation and different type of practices on the landscape, that would better fit under the Watershed Operations Program to determine what the courses of action would be needed to take to address the concerns there and your resource concerns. So that sounds like a better project for watershed operations.
And then just to clarify, does the disaster need to be federally declared a disaster to be eligible for EWP?
No, for EWP, there could be federal declared disasters or locally declared disasters. One that is local will be declared by the governor of the state, or even our agency, state conservationists. The NRCS state conservationists could declare a disaster. So those are the two options. In the event funding is provided only for Stafford Act funding, then it has to be federal. But we'll get into that after the declaration has been made, and as far as what funding is eligible to address it. But no, you can simply have a request for a disaster that's declared by a governor or NRCS state conservationist even.
Okay, we're actually hitting the noon hour, Kevin. We have quite a few more questions left. Should we just keep going? And
keep going so that
okay.
who wants to stay on they can stay on, and others can drop off if need be. But I do want to try to address everyone's question.
Okay, sounds great. So the next question is, can EWP assist with removal of contaminated sediment from a reservoir on mine-owned land, which was caused by excessive sediment runoff by a recent fire?
So if there is sediment that was caused by a recent disaster, it would be eligible for EWP assistance. Now, the contaminated part is where we would have to get into as far as how you would treat this debris. If the the organization who is operating the mine has some kind of responsibility or liability, or if it's under some other federal jurisdiction, we do need to determine those things first to determine if it's something that another federal agency has a jurisdiction or administration over. Or if like I said, the organization who's operating the mine facility may be in violation of something that they didn't do as a result of their water quality controls that they should have had on, or erosion control prevention measures that they should have had in place. So there's a few things we need to identify there. Simply saying contaminated sediment itself doesn't really say yay and nay as it relates to EWP. EWP is looking at the impairment. What really kind of gives us a challenge here is who is responsible and what is if there is whether or not a violation that this particular organization is in as it relates to these types of discharges. So there's a little bit more that needs to be done there, but EWP can be used for sediment removal, including soil sediment debris that may be in place. But for this particular instance, I would say we need to work closely with the regulators in the state and those who are involved to determine if it's eligible or if someone else is responsible.
And then also regarding EWP, is there a minimum or maximum request amount?
No, there isn't a threshold on the request amount. It just needs to be economically defensible. So we do ask that the cost, the benefits exceed the cost, so that it is beneficial, but there is no maximum request amount or minimum request amount. It just needs to be economically defensible.
Okay, and how does this NRCS watershed plan relate to existing sub-basin plans, regional plans, or watershed assessments, and strategic action plans developed by local groups?
Yeah, so a lot of those would inform any local work done would inform the work that NRCS is doing. These are collaborative efforts, the planning efforts with us and the local communities. So all of those basin plans and local studies that have been conducted, they would definitely feed into the PIFR. So during that PIFR phase, they would be very well used to inform what goes into that PIFR. And then during the planning stage, if it's determined that the project is feasible, during the planning stage, some of that information may be usable or useful to help NRCS in developing a document that would guide our state conservationists in making a federal decision and recording that decision that we've made. And as far as whether or not this is a viable project, and then ultimately whether or not it's one to be authorized. So that information can guide and help to inform our process for determining feasibility with the PIFR or the planning, but we don't simply adopt those documents to say let's go forth and do. We have to conduct our federal required investigations.
Okay, and then do any of the programs support land acquisitions?
Through an easement, there is an opportunity for land acquisition for the purposes of doing easements and restoration. So that's one opportunity there.
And is there a map of EWP projects? They're particularly interested in the California projects.
We do not have a map today of EWP projects. There are story maps that we're developing to include some information on select projects as success stories, but we do not have a map that publicly identifies all of the projects out there.
And then can this program be of benefit to a municipal water authority that has no agricultural?
So if that municipal water authority is rural, then it could be of benefit because the requirement is 20%. The benefits have to be 20% ag, including rural. So, if there is no agriculture benefit, but there are benefits for rural communities, then there's an opportunity there.
And then with regards to COVID, they'd like to know, with all the unknowns associated with COVID, would there be any impacts on existing project backlogs? Do you anticipate any delays moving requests for potential projects through the review/approval process?
No, I don't anticipate COVID having an impact on performance. We've been dealing with it now almost 2 years and still able to move things along, and actually some things have ramped up. So as far as production, so I don't anticipate that being a major impact.
Okay, and then do academic institutions require a sponsor?
Yes, if they're not a subdivision of the state or state government, so state agency, they would require a sponsor because they may not meet all the requirements of being a sponsor. So they may require a sponsor that's eligible and meets all the eligibility requirements.
And then to actually qualify for NRCS funding involving flood prevention, flood damage, does the area have to fall within the FEMA classified 100-year flood hazard area?
Not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily have to fall within the FEMA designated area to qualify for assistance. That's not one of the requirements that we place on eligibility for the programs.
And then is it better to have only one eligible purpose?
That depends on the project. So, as flexible as you want to get, I'd say let's be as flexible as possible to address as comprehensive of a project that we can. So there's, if you leave something out and there's other purposes that need to be addressed, I would say do the most comprehensive planning effort that you can.
Okay, thanks. Does a local sponsor need to be able to levy taxes? If so, when was that requirement implemented?
So a local sponsor needs to be able to carry out the work and definitely the O&M operation and maintenance. So that may include levying taxes to be able to pay for that type of work. So the importance there is that you're able to secure funding to be able to carry out the work that's necessary. If it's a state agency, obviously states have taxes. If it's a municipal or type of organization, then they have the county, city government have the ability to levy taxes. And even if it's a tribal organization, the bottom line is you have to have the ability to generate revenue to be able to operate and maintain the structures for the life of the agreed to project.
Okay, and on that same note, if an NRCS sponsored dam is declared by state dam jurisdiction as unsafe emergency condition, but a disaster has not occurred, is that dam eligible then for the EWP program?
So yeah, I answered that earlier in saying that you have to have a disaster that connects the need for or facilitates the need for EWP. So if there hasn't been a disaster, then it would not be eligible for EWP assistance if it wasn't a disaster that caused the damage. If it's one of our structures, we can evaluate it to see if it's eligible for remedial repairs, and we would want to work. You would want to work with your NRCS state office to determine if there is a need for or investigate the need for repairs, and if there is a remedial issue with the structure that needs to be addressed.
And in regards again to EWP, can the funding be used in response to a hazard event that occurred over 2 years ago?
So we're talking about emergencies here. So the requirement is that it's within 60 days of the event or when the site is accessible. So at the point of 2 years, I don't know if we would still consider that an emergency, So we do ask that the request be within 60 days of the date of the disaster or when the site becomes accessible. And that's because some disasters are such that in 60 days, you may not even be able to get to the sites or you may not even get to all of them in 60 days. So that's why that is the case.
And then is there a minimum watershed size? If we have a specific area of concern, do we have to look at a larger area? What determines the size?
Yeah, so that's established when you're starting to do your planning to determine your scoping to determine, what's the scope of this project and what is the need there. So that's one of the steps of planning to determine, when you start to identify the problem, you would want to go out and identify how broad this problem is, and it can't be just on one person's land. That is a requirement, that it can't just benefit one individual. It has to be more of a public type of project. So you want to look at the limits and the extremes of this project to determine its scope and where are we best able to address the resource concern in the watershed fully and not just in an isolated area per se. So you do want to identify a targeted area that is benefiting the watershed, not a landowner, not a specific site, but the watershed as a whole there.
And the next question is about the eligible phases of a project. They'd like to know if it's combined into one or if they're treated and funded separately. So dam repair, like dam repair, reservoir rehab, ditch repair, etc., are all part of what needs to be completed. Are they all treated as individual, or can they be combined into one project?
So the project, what we consider to be the project, would be what is authorized in the plan. So that's the project. So it's the watershed project as a whole that may have many elements and many measures to it, and it may even have some sub-watersheds in it. And it may be completed in phases. So, but what we consider to be a project is what's in the authorized watershed plan as a whole. So it wouldn't be a phased plan. It would be a total plan that's authorized. And then within that plan, you may identify certain measures to install at a certain time, at a given time. But that's what you would work with NRCS on to determine when you make your request for funding of design and construction, if you're going to fund the design for all the work that's identified in the plan that's authorized, or phases of that work. But whatever you do, it has to be a project that will stand alone as complete. So, it can't be, I'm going to do a phase of something, but it's not a complete, phase. It's just something that I'm going to do until I get to the next piece. It has to be a completed work, that a measure that will function independently, completed once it's done.
Okay, and we just have 3 more questions. to do here, and that's the next one is a WFPO question. If floodplain acquisition is the preferred alternative for purpose of flood damage reduction, is public access required for the land with a floodplain easement?
Public access isn't necessarily required, but there may be some access easements that are on there, depending on what else is needed. But the entities, so in the event that the sponsor actually takes the land as part of their, if they take the land and they hold the easement, then there may be a desire that they have recreational benefits, or they allow for something else, hunting or whatever. They may allow public access, but there's not a requirement that there has to be public access. So there's not a strict requirement on that.
And then may a waiver be sought for the 60-day rule from disaster deadline for sponsors to request assistance?
Yes, a waiver may be sought. So you may request a waiver, and the way you would do that is you would write your state conservationist and request a waiver to the 60-day rule, and then that policy, I should say. And then once that waiver has been received, they would then formulate a request to us here in headquarters to do a policy waiver and make a decision on whether or not the policy would be waived.
Okay, and the next one is regarding the sponsor taxing authority. What about mutual canal companies? They are typically private, not-for-profit stock companies, but they can assess assessments or O&M for installed infrastructure. However, they cannot assess taxes. Can they also then be a sponsor?
So that the ability to do O&M is not the sole requirement for sponsorship. So the one thing that you want to identify there as eligibility for sponsors is that it is a legal subdivision of the state, or it is a local organization, such as a city, municipal type of organization, town, or a tribal organization. So that's what you want to identify there. But if it's not a legal subdivision of the state or a state agency, it's just a private non-for-profit district organization that's private non-for-profit, doesn't have anything to do as far as it relates to state organized and being able to function under the authority of the state to do the work, and is authorized to do this work under the state, then it would not be an eligible sponsor. So that's what really you're looking at more so. In addition to that, we do require that the sponsors have the ability to operate and maintain the structures.
Okay, thanks. And just before I ask you the last question, I just want to reassure everyone that we will be sending you an email with the link to the recorded meeting and also to the PDF slide deck. If for some reason you weren't able to log on with an email, then just go ahead and put it in the Q&A and I'll make sure you get a copy. All right, and then the next question, Kevin, is a WFPO question. For purpose of watershed protection, the manual states that federal funding assistance must not exceed the rate of assistance or funding limits to program participants for similar programs. If more than one other national program covers a certain practice, how is the cost share determined?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily the practice itself, because any of our practices can be done under any program. It's the specific, what is specifically what you're trying to accomplish. So for instance, if the work that you're trying to do could also be eligible under the authority of, let's say, our EQIP program, then we would match the NRCS cost shares or cost structure that we would provide under that program. So it's really, what other authority would there be as far as our conservation programs that you could use to do the work, and we would not exceed those authorities to do that work. So if an authority eligible, if this work is eligible to be done under authorities that would allow for 90% cost share, then that's the authority we could match, but we couldn't give you 100% cost share if the same work was eligible to be done under that. So, but that's for the watershed protection purpose, not for any of the other purposes. Those other purposes have their own structures as it relates to cost share. But watershed protection does specifically spell out that it cannot exceed any other conservation program or USDA conservation program.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. That wraps it up for today. Do you want to take us out?
Yeah, thank you all for calling in. I hope that today's live meeting was helpful. And I do want to thank again Ralph, Jesse, and John for leading us through a great training. Thank you, Lark, for facilitating and carrying us through this event. Everyone, please go on and see what was posted. And we hope that you can, go back and see this information, view it as many times as needed. This information will be available on our website as well as other ways that Lark will get it out to you. So we'll make sure it's there. And I think some of our partners as well will have the information posted to their sites as well so that you can get it there. In addition to that, we hope that each of you will be submitting requests for assistance and we can serve the masses of you as best as possible to do something to help address the watershed concerns within your landscape. So thank you very much and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.